Alright, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to be upgrading the Growing Hope starter deck on a budget. We will not be using any rares, so if you want to upgrade these decks, you need to go to your starter deck tab here. You need to select the deck you want to upgrade, and you need to go down here and hit clone, because you cannot edit these starter decks in the starter deck tab, but this is going to create a copy under your decks right here, and this can be upgraded to your liking. So, this is a Selesnya +1/+1 counters deck, as you see with Botanical Brawler, which enters with 2 counters and then gets a counter whenever something else gets a counter. We have Kami of Whispered Hopes. This distributes counters. This also gives counters to things when they enter if they're small. So yeah, it's a +1/+1 counters deck. We do have a lot of less optimal things. You know, this is not exceptional. This isn't great. You know, we have some medium stuff. That's okay. We can fix it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to click right here if you're in this layout, or if you're on this layout, you want to click right here. Either's fine, but we want to click here and we want to go to standard. Alchemy is a much more powerful format, and you're much less likely to win with a starter deck against decks of that caliber. So we only have a couple cards that are legal, and that's totally fine. So we can take out this 1-drop here, which is an Alchemy 1-drop that we don't care about, and we can replace it with Enduring Bond Warden. So this is just a 1-mana 0/1. When it dies, it puts its counters on target creature. It has backup, by the way, so it enters with a counter. You generally want to target itself with its own counter. So it's basically just a 1-mana 1/2 that when it dies, it's going to pass its counter. But the reason that's good is, like, if we have this in play already, for example, sure, it's a 1-mana 1/2, but it's going to also put a counter here. It's also going to get an extra counter here. It's going to put a counter here. So it's a 1-mana 1/2 that in this specific deck is very good, and then it's going to pass its counter along. Also note, so I don't know why, I see a lot of these +1/+1 counter decks with Evolving Adaptive. It's a 1-mana 1/1. It gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it, and it gets an oil counter whenever something bigger enters. The problem is, it doesn't synergize with anything. This only cares about +1/+1 counters, not oil counters. This only cares about +1/+1 counters. This only cares about +1/+1 counters. It doesn't really synergize with anything. I think people are mistaken that they think this is getting +1/+1 counters. It technically isn't. It's technically getting oil counters and then getting +1/+1 for each oil counter. So it's not good, but I see it in decks like this all the time, which is very weird. So next we have this Sylvan Smite, which is an alchemy card that we don't care about because we're not playing alchemy. So we're going to take these out and we're going to replace them with Gaias Gift. So this is another spell that adds a counter, and it gives the creature reach, trample, hexproof, and indestructible. So this is powerful because it's both offensive and defensive. It gives the creature trample. We are really good at making giant, massive creatures that don't have trample. I mean, this does have trample built in, which is really nice, but we can dump tons of counters on something, and then it gets chump blocked, so we can give it trample. That's nice, but also we can protect our giant creature with hexproof and indestructible if necessary. So it's nice having a couple of these. So next we have Fertilid's Favor. It's a 4-mana instant. You get a basic land, and then you put 2 +1/+1 counters on something. That's fine, but it's not as good as Kami of Whispered Hope. It's a 3-mana 1/1 that taps for X mana. Note that this land enters tapped, so you can't use it the turn it enters. This also, doesn't have haste. So you get mana the following turn either way, but this will also put counters on all your other stuff. It's going to double your counters, basically. It's a hardened scales, essentially, which is a little bit more powerful than just getting 2 here, I think. So it's also cheaper. It's 1 mana cheaper. So we'll take out 2 of those, and we'll add 2 of these. Kami of Whispered Hopes is typically played in these Selesnya counters decks. So next we have this Juniper Order Root Weaver, which is, it's not great. It's 2 mana 2/2, so nothing exciting. If you pay an extra 1, so 3 mana for 2/2, you get to put 1 counter on something. So if you put it on itself, it's a 3 mana 3/3. It's just not that exciting. It's way less powerful than Botanical Brawler. I'm going to take 2 out for 2 of these. I mean, this thing is just insane. It enters with 2 +1/+1 counters, and then whenever anything gets a +1/+1 counter, this will also get one. For the first time, not the first time you get a +1/+1 counter, but the first time each permanent gets a +1/+1 counter. So if you put 3 +1/+1 counters on 3 permanents, this will also get 3 counters. But yeah, it's very powerful. It is like the reason we're playing a deck like this. Next, we can optimize this. So this is 3 mana. When it enters, exile something until it leaves the battlefield. And there's no reason to play this over ossification. So this is basically the same thing. It enters, it exiles a creature or planeswalker. Was this non-land permanent? No, it's creature or planeswalker, so it exiles the same thing. And then, yes, if they blow this up, they get the creature back. If they blow this up, they get the creature back. The only drawback here is this has to go on a basic land, but we'll usually have, one, hopefully. So, yeah, it's just better to take these 3 out for 3 ossifications, because it does the same thing for 1 mana cheaper. Next, this Ruined Recluse is pretty clunky. It's a 1 mana 1/1, or it's not a 1 mana 1/1, it's a 2 mana 1/1 with Reach and Death Touch, which is fine. It's like a sort of removal spell, kind of. And you could pay 4 to put a counter on it. I mean, it's kind of fine, but I really like it. It's underrated, I think. Contortion Troop. This is kind of good, and people don't really play it. It's an X and green for X +1/+1 counter, so you can pay 2 for it for a 1/1 if you really need it. If you draw it in the late game, you can pay 9 for it for an 8/8, whatever. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more creatures with different powers, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. So that's not too hard because we're distributing counters a lot. We can kind of manipulate the power of our creatures for Coven pretty easily, and then we just get these counters every turn. We can also target something that hasn't already gotten a counter, so we can get an extra counter here. So I definitely think it's worth taking 2 Ruins Recluse out for 2 Contortionist Troop. I feel like this card is just underrated in this archetype. And similarly, I just don't think this card's very good. 2 mana 2/2 gets a counter if you pay an extra mana. I'd rather cut this for an extra Contortionist Troop, so we'll go up to 3 of those. Next, we get a rare from one of the other decks, and that's Siege Veteran. This is a 3 mana 2/2 at the beginning of combat. We get a +1/+1 counter on any creature. It also has this, if a soldier dies, we get a 1/1. I believe we have 1 other soldier in the deck too. We have 2 soldiers, but that's not really the goal. We just want a 3 mana 2/2 that puts a counter out every turn, and it is pretty much strictly better than Fairgrounds Trumpeter. This is a 3 mana 2/2 that at the beginning of our end step, if something else got a +1/+1 counter, we put a +1/+1 counter on this. So it's not a guarantee. We'll usually get it, but not always. Whereas this, also a 3 mana 2/2 that always gets one, right? Like, this is a 3 mana 2/2, maybe it gets a counter like 80% of the time. This is a 3 mana 2/2 that gets to counter 100% of the time. We also do it before combat, so it's relevant in combat. This is end of turn. Also, this only goes on itself. This can target anything, so it can still go on itself. You can just put it on itself every turn, but it can also go on another creature with trample, for example, so it's just better. Ideally, I would replace all 3 of these with 3 Siege Veterans, but we are not spending rares. This is just it was in one of the other decks. It was in the Azorius Soldiers deck, the High Flying Valor deck. So if you don't have this, go unlock that deck and you'll get 1 copy for free. We can improve the mana base as well with Botanical Plaza. So Radiant Grove enters tapped, adds green and white. Botanical Plaza enters tapped, adds green and white, but it can also be sacrificed, and that's just strictly better. Technically, this has the land types, forest, plains. This doesn't, but that's not relevant. There's no benefit to having forest and plains, so Botanical Plaza is just better. So we're basically done. I do have an optional change. I just want to mention it. It's probably worth it. So both of these spells down here are not commonly played. They're okay, right? This is a fight spell or a mana fixer if you need it. This is a pump spell that if you pay 4 for it, will put counters on everything, a 1/+1/+1 counter on each creature. So both of these are fine. I personally would rather just have 4 Iron Apprentice. So in my deck, I would be cutting these 4 out for 4 of these. I don't know if it's 100% necessary. I do think it's better. This is, it's basically just like this card. It's a 1 mana 1/1, or it's a 1 mana 0/0, enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then when it dies, it puts its counters on something else. So if it has its counters doubled with this, if it soaks up counters from this is a great, both of these, by the way, are great targets for something like this, just because you load up the counters, make it huge. If the opponent kills it, they'll put their counters on something else. So yeah, I'd like to have 8 of those. I'd like to take these out for this, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. I think these have some value. So I'll consider that unofficial. I'll consider that a recommendation, but not a requirement. I mean, none of this is a requirement, but you know what I mean. So that's the deck. We do have some rares that are worth talking about. So first off, a lot of the rares in the deck are very good, like Quirion Beastcaller, like Dusk Legion Duelist, like the Ozolith, Siege Veteran. There's also Hopeful Initiate, Fight Rigging. There's a lot of rares that we could potentially add to this deck. And the Wandering Emperor. So all of these are great. I'll go over them super quick. Some of them are in your deck already, of course, so you know what they do. Wandering Emperor, one of the best planeswalkers, removal spells in standard, and it does add counters with its +1. Fight Rigging puts a counter on something every turn, and then when something gets really big, you get the Hideaway card. You hide away 5, so that's pretty good. All of these, of course, are great. They're already in the deck. Hopeful Initiate is a solid 1-drop. I don't know if it's necessary, but it's a 1-mana 1/2. It has training, so it's going to get counters when it attacks alongside bigger stuff. So it's fine. I still don't know if it's as good as Iron Apprentice. But yeah, these are some of the things you want to be considering. The big ones being Aquarian Beastcaller is great. Ozolith is great. And Siege Veteran is pretty good. I'd say all of these three at the very least. The weak cards in the deck are probably Strength of the Coalition, Bushwhack, Fairgrounds Trumpeter. As I said, I'd just much rather have Siege Veteran over Fairgrounds Trumpeter. Storm the Seed Core. All of these are like budget cards, so any of these being replaced with any of these would be solid. Like taking out 2 Storm the Seed Cores for 2 Wandering Emperor would be a huge improvement. Taking out 2 Fairgrounds Trumpeters for 2 Siege Veterans would be massive. Taking out 2 Strength of the Coalition for 2 Ozolith would be great, right? Like this, you have to pay 4 for it, and then you get a counter on everything. Or you just double counters for 2, which is pretty good. And it has the ability to put counters on things. So yeah, I would be looking to take out these things for these things. But yeah, that's our upgrades. I mean, just getting our full playset of Botanical Brawler and Kami of Whispered Hopes helps a lot. And some of the optimizations with like ossification and stuff should just make the deck feel a lot smoother. So yeah, there you go. Should be good. Definitely should be much better than what you started with. Still a budget deck, of course. Would love to see more Aquarian Beastcallers and Ozoliths and whatnot, but overall, still pretty solid. Link in the description to the full deck list. Let me know how the deck feels. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope that's helpful. And I will see you in the next one.